Hello friends, for today's video we're looking at episodes 11 through 15 of the original Avatar: The Last Airbender. And if you're new, the way I've been doing these videos is that I give kind of a very brief recap of what happens in those episodes and then just talk about my raw reactions that I had while watching. I am a first-time viewer, I don't know anything about this series, I managed to avoid all spoilers for it, but I never got the chance to watch it growing up, so I'm remedying that as an adult, and I'm absolutely loving the show so far. Episodes 11 through 15 have been my favorites of the 15 that I've seen, so I'm really excited to jump into it and talk about it. In the previous couple of videos I've done, because I have been doing these in batches of 5, I've noted that occasionally you'll get an episode that maybe isn't as significant or vital for the overall arc of the characters or the greater plot, but that provides additional world building or is a nice break in the more intense aspects of the story. You'll get something that's a little bit sillier, a little bit lighter. I definitely think episode 11 fell into that. If you don't remember, because I would be surprised if you do, episode 11 is when there's infighting among the different refugees that have been affected by the Fire Nation. And so even though they should be united in this shared struggle, they are instead filled with hatred toward one another. And Aang and gang are looking at this beautiful landscape that is essentially the Grand Canyon, and they need to cross this area, and they're looking to an earthbender to likely get themselves across. But then they see these other individuals that need to cross the canyon as well. And Aang agrees to try to mediate, even though he doesn't really seem like he wants to. Katara just throws him into it and is like, Aang will help because he's the Avatar. And he's like, So in the two different groups, you see one group that wants to bring their elderly across, and then the other group wants to bring their sick across, and they feel like, no, it's more important that our elderly get across. No, it's more important that the sick get across. So Aang nicely offers to have Appa fly the elderly and the sick across, and they're like, I guess that's a solution. And then the rest of them will go through the canyon. The one thing they're not supposed to bring, though, along the way is food, because if they do, it might attract the chasm fiends, basically. That's a Stormlight Archive thing. But they're gonna attract the attention of monsters within the canyon, and so the guide tells them, everybody eat your food now, leave your food if you can't eat it all, but it's so important that you don't bring it. And does anybody listen? No. A few goofy thoughts that I wanted to note while watching was when they first arrive, when Aang and Katara and Sokka first arrive, this canyon is basically like the Grand Canyon, and they're like, wow, it's so majestic. And then Sokka's looking at it, and he's like, I've seen enough. And then he just is kind of over it after a second. And as somebody who lives in the state that the Grand Canyon is in, I feel like that is a very relatable reaction, because you look at it and you're like, wow. And then after a bit, you're like, I don't know what to do with this anymore. Do I keep just staring at it? So I really liked, I know it's a silly thing to note, but I really liked Sokka's reaction to it. I also really liked when the different groups are fighting with each other and they're arguing about the importance of the elderly and the sick. And one of them shouts, if you weren't so clean, you wouldn't live to be old. And I thought that was a hilarious argument, because the other side had just said, the reason you're all sick is because you're so dirty. So for this to be the comeback, I loved it. I will say this was not Katara's best episode. One, I kind of already said this, but she completely threw Aang into the role of mediator, and I didn't really feel like that was fair, because Aang was like, I don't really know what I'm doing, and she's like, he's the Avatar, he can do it, and then he tried his best, and he did in the end come up with a solution once it's discovered that both groups had food, and poor Aang was the only one that abided by the rule that the tour guide set out, and he's super hungry, but he figures out how to deal with the monsters by tying their mouths shut with the sacks that they used to carry the food, and then they rode them out of the canyon, that kind of thing. So even though he still did end up presenting a solution, I still thought it was very unfair for Katara to throw him into that. Man, if she had done that to me, I would have been so mad, because I do not like being thrust into situations where I feel ill-prepared. And I just really felt for Aang in that moment. Katara also, when she's with one group and then Sokka is with the other, and they're both discovering separately, one, the reason why the groups have this long history of hating each other, but then two, that each group did bring food. Katara, when she's like, wait, you brought food? And they're like, we know the other side was going to bring food anyway, so why shouldn't we? And they go to offer her some food. She's like, and I wrote down, because it was funny to me, I guess it's okay if everyone's doing it. And I'm like, Katara, that's the worst logic ever. And then meanwhile, Sokka's just like, okay, and he doesn't try to justify it. He's just eating the food, and later he's like, I just took their side because they fed me, which I was like, I appreciate the honesty, Sokka. I do think this episode was a little heavy-handed, and I think the show of course, it's meant to be a kid's show, and of course adults can enjoy it too, but I understand that sometimes they're gonna maybe not be the most subtle with their theming. However, this episode really did cross into kind of almost cliche territory, with the exception of the end of the episode when you find out that Aang lied. So he tells the two groups, wait a second, I was alive when all this happened. I remember this whole thing. And then he tells them the truth. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I guess maybe we shouldn't hate each other. And then they're like, wow, Aang, it's so bizarre that you knew. And he's like, I just made that all up. I actually did really like that was sort of the twist in the episode. I still think it was maybe not the strongest of episodes, but we just sort of ended with a bang in the last couple episodes with them going to the Fire Nation and there being that really intense moment when Aang sees the previous avatar. So I do appreciate the overall pacing of the season thus far. I just think this is not the strongest or most meaningful of episodes. That said, episode 12 was fantastic. I feel like episode 12 through 15 were all so good. So episode 12 is the storm, and we're seeing a lot of survivor's guilt with Aang, and I mentioned previously that when he first went to the air temple and he really had to come to terms with his new reality, that I thought that was very sad, but I thought that it was important that that scene happened. And this is another one too, where he's trying to reconcile what he did in the past, which really wasn't his fault, as far as he blames himself for not being there when the air temple was attacked because he ran off, and you understand now why he ran away, and his reason for running away was really, really sad. But he feels so guilty because in his mind he thinks, if I had only been there, maybe things would be different, or, you know, then the people at that time would have had their avatar. So I felt for him so much, and the voice actor, all the voice actors are phenomenal, but there's a part where he's kind of on the verge of crying, and the way his voice almost cracks, it's very well done. So I thought his emotional turmoil in this episode was really well done. I thought it made sense that it was kind of coupled with this feeling of the storm, and there's a great scene where it parallels what happened when him and Appa got stuck in the ice and when he was first going underwater. That, and then you also see in present day when they're all going under during the storm under the waves. There's that moment of it's very similar to what happened in his past, except for this time him and Appa pushed through, and I just thought the way that those parallels were shown was really fantastic. And speaking of parallels, the way that the parallel between Aang and his past and Zuko and his past, the way that those are laid out for you was phenomenal. Now just going through some of my brief reactions while watching. First off, I said, yay, Zuko, because we didn't get any Zuko in the previous episode, and I really like this character just because I feel like there's so much potential in this character, and I really like what they're doing with him. So I was excited that he was back, and I wrote, although, hey, care about your crew more, when he was like, who cares about the crew? We have to find the avatar, which obviously by the end of this episode, we see him apologize, and we see him help one of his crew members, and he values his crew. He ends up valuing his crew over the avatar because he does see Aang in the moment where Aang is going to rescue Sokka. So we know that there's a good person in there, and I mean, I feel like you can tell the whole season, and he's just very filled with anger because of what's happened in his past, but we'll get to that. I laughed when the woman and the man that are arguing when Aang and Katara and Sokka first come up to this area, and they're arguing about whether or not there's going to be a storm, and the woman is like, you don't understand, my joints are telling me there's going to be a really bad storm. And he's like, there's not going to be a storm. And then she tells him, like, no, but my joints. And he says, it's your joints versus my brain. And I thought that was funny, but also I like how in the end her joints proved more accurate than his brain. So maybe listen to your wife, buddy. But anyway, I also wrote poor Aang with a sad face, and then, but it was nice of Katara to stick up for him, because the old man starts yelling when he realizes, like, hey, wait, you're the Avatar. Where have you been the last 100 years? You just left us all and ran away. And then Aang gets sad and he runs off, and I'm like, oh, poor Aang. It was sad. But again, I'm glad Katara was there to comfort him. She's always a very nice friend, and she's very good at comforting people. And then I put Appa comforts Aang, because the way Appa is there for him too. I love Appa so much. In my notes I wrote Zuko info with a bunch of exclamation points, because I've been waiting for this moment for us to finally get this backstory. I mean, I kind of pieced together based off the hints they've been giving us, but it was nice to finally see it. And then I also wrote that he genuinely seemed like he was going to be a good ruler, and that he really cared. The whole reason that he got in trouble in the first place is because he did value some of the Fire Nation's soldiers over the other thing that they were going for, this goal they had. He was like, but that would throw so many of them into danger, and then that's the thing that was seen as disrespect. But he wanted to learn, he wanted to make sure he was prepared when he eventually took the throne, and then he stuck up for people, and he was punished for it, and it just kind of breaks your heart a little bit for Zuko, because you're like, oh, he's actually very noble. He just has a terrible father. And I wrote, because this is the first time I think I've seen this person where it would seem, because there's a part where Uncle Iroh is telling the crew of the ship what happened to Zuko. And in the scene, he talks about how he had to turn away when Zuko was harmed by his father. He had to look away. And you see that awful general in the background behind Uncle Iroh, and then you see this girl in front of him who looks very pleased at what's happening, and she looks young, and I'm like, does Zuko have a sister? Does he have a sister who his father pitted them against each other, and that's why she's so weirdly gleeful in this moment? And also, when are we gonna see her? If we don't see her at all this season, that's a great little thing to look out for in a future season, to be like, oh, they did kind of hint that she was going to be here. I could also see her showing up in the next 5 episodes. I think the next 5 is the last of this first season, so I'll be curious to see if she does show up. But yeah, I wrote Zuko has a horrible sister with some question marks, because that's my guess so far. That's my prediction, but I don't actually know for a fact. Katara also, I mentioned this in the previous video, she has a bad habit. And it's a double-edged sword, because on one hand it's good, on the other hand it's not. But in my opinion, currently I feel like it leans into being a bad habit, which is that she can be a little too simplistic with her optimism. And I specifically wrote down a quote of her doing this once again, where Aang was sad about his past and the situation, and she said, I know it's meant to be this way. And I don't like the way that she always kind of frames everything as it's meant to be, so therefore it's fine. This is also incredibly random, but the one person that showed up in Aang's past was the voice actor from Mulan, right? I haven't seen the animated Mulan in so many years, but as soon as one of the other people shows up and they're talking, I'm like, that's the guy from Mulan. This is all over the place. I know this episode's all over the place, but because of the way it would go back and forth between Aang and Zuko, I kind of was darting back and forth in my notes. When you're looking at Aang's past, they were going to separate him from the nice mentor, and he already is feeling excluded from his friends. The other monks seem like they just care about him being this vehicle for saving the world, but they don't really see him as a person, even though he's just a young boy. And there's the one mentor character that's sweet with him and silly with him and plays games with him and seems to genuinely care about him. And they were like, you're distracting him. So they were going to send him away, and it made me so sad. And then that quote when he comes in to comfort Aang and he says, I'm not going to let them take you away from me. I'm like, no, this makes me sad. He was so sweet with him. Can't they just stick together and be happy? And then I liked when they were out in the storm in present day, very random quote, where Sokka's like, I'm too young to die. And then the old man's like, I'm old and I still don't wanna. Anyway, at the end, even though I already kind of voiced this, I wrote, I really liked the parallel to Aang's past and the parallel between him and Zuko, but then I liked how that was literally shown, because when they cross paths during the storm, you see the two of them sort of look at each other. So I thought this episode was fantastic. Leading now into episode 13, this is when, because of the storm, Sokka and Katara are getting sick, and so Aang's like, let me go see if I can find something to help all of you. And then he is captured. General Zhao, something like that. The general who none of us like, I'm sure. That person has been promoted, and now they are really close to having enough power that they can do basically whatever they want in pursuit of Aang. And they employ these archers who are unrealistically talented in archery, but that's fine. That didn't bug me. They capture Aang, and I was so excited because I loved when there was that conversation between the general and Aang when Aang's chained up. And the general is just being a snooty, obnoxious villain, but he goes to leave and Aang does that and then just slams into the guy, and I was like, yes. It was just very satisfying because I hate that guy. Another moment of Katara's optimism. So Sokka gets sick first, then Katara gets sick. And when Sokka isn't doing well, she just says, I'm sure he'll be better by tomorrow. And that's what I mean by she's just always a little too optimistic. I know it's probably going to get annoying that I keep mentioning that. The reason I'm taking note of it, though, is because, one, I'll be curious to see, and I guess this is sort of a prediction, if we're going to touch on this, of this being sort of her coping mechanism for when things get tough, where she suppresses and then she just hopes for the best. But I want to lay out those moments, because if this does turn into something, if I'm right, that we're going to see this come about in a future episode, I'm not trying to know all these examples as a way to be like, see, I was right, but rather to show appreciation for those hints along the way, because this is something that I could see being a subtle character development that you don't really realize until that potential future episode, because I guess I don't know for a fact, but I could see this being something that is not at the forefront, and thus you almost don't realize it, but then when you look back or rewatch, then you realize just how brilliant the writing was. So I'm assuming that's what's going to happen, but I don't know for sure, but hence why I wanted to make note of it. And then I just wrote in my notes, Zuko, with a bunch of O's. I was sad for Aang at the end of the episode when they're like, did you make any new friends? And he's like, I don't think so. And he's all curled up. But I do really like when you see him kind of sad and curled up, and it shows Zuko, and he's just contemplative and thinking, and you're like, come on, Zuko, stop. Just think about what you could do if you worked together. Look how awesome it was when you did work together. And also, if you hate this general guy, and he keeps being promoted, this is the kind of army and rhetoric and behavior that your father awards. So maybe you should reflect on whether the Fire Nation is worth serving. Do you even want this honor? And I like that you're slowly seeing that deconstructing of everything he's been fed and thought to believe about his nation and his father. I'm just really excited for when we're going to finally see, because I really liked this little sneak peek of what it could be like. If I'm right, I'm pretty sure they're going to work together at some point. I really liked this sneak peek of what it could be like if they worked together. Now, episode 14, The Fortune Teller. We had episode 11, which was sort of okay, this isn't as big of a deal after the really intense episodes that had come before. And then I think this one falls into the same camp. But as far as the sort of one-off silly episodes go, I think this has been my favorite of those ones. The ones that aren't the greater plot, but they're fun miniature arcs. This one was hilarious. And the pining, this like innocent love that these kids have is really cute and explored in a really funny way. I will say, I feel like Sokka, it's rare for Sokka to be the most level-headed practical one, but he was completely right in the situation where there were the town. If you don't remember this episode, there's a town that bases pretty much all of their decisions, both on a town level and an individual level, based off of what their fortune teller tells them. And so much so that there's this volcano that's nearby the village. They used to go up to it every single year to check and see if it was going to erupt. And they've stopped doing that because they're like, we'll just see what the fortune teller says. And Aang and Sokka end up discovering that, yeah, it's going to erupt despite the fact that the fortune teller said the village isn't going to be destroyed by the volcano. So they rush to try to convince the town, and at first the town's like, no, it won't. And then all of a sudden the ground starts shaking, and they're like, oh wait, I guess it will. They still, though, are convinced that they'll be safe because the fortune teller told them so, and Aang and Katara end up using their bending skills and flight on top of Appa to get the clouds to look a certain way where the fortune teller would say, oh yeah, the volcano is going to erupt. So I did really like Sokka has a moment. I wrote, hey, Sokka is correct about the village. Not about being aloof, though, which I'll get to in a second. But they're arguing with him about, like, oh, why don't you just believe for once instead of being so scientific and basing everything on reason? Can your science and reason explain rain? And he's like, it can! And he's losing his mind, and I'm like, ooh, yeah, I'm with Sokka on this one. But the aloofness part of it. So a lot of this episode, you see Aang has a crush on Katara, and then there's a little girl named Mang who has a crush on Aang, and Sokka can see this with the random girl Mang liking Aang, but he has no idea, it would seem, even though he teases him here and there. He doesn't realize that Aang is totally in love with Katara. And at one point, Aang's like, oh, there's a girl I like, and he being Sokka, sees Mang is in love with Aang, and he's like, I know what you're talking about, and you know what? I think she likes you too. And Aang gets all excited, and then he's like, but you gotta be aloof. You can't let them know you like them. And Aang's like, really? And Aang's attempts to be aloof are very funny, because he just kind of like slinks back onto walls and stuff. I guess his version of being aloof is just leaning on stuff, which was amusing. I also really liked, this was earlier in the episode, but when he makes a little necklace for Katara, which was very sweet. And when she's like, what do you think? And she puts it on, and he sees her as this, beautiful, twinkly person. And then when he goes to the village and Mang sees him for the first time, she envisions him as this, beautiful, twinkly person, except for he's just like slouching and looks like a goober. I don't know why that is her vision of the perfect person, or at least somebody that she's like, oh, maybe I'll marry them someday. But I did like that little joke. I found it quite amusing. But anyway, Aang is awesome. That's what I wrote in my notes, because at the end, when the volcano erupts, the village all tried to dig trenches to direct the lava away, but it wasn't going to be enough. There's just too much. And Aang uses his airbending to make sure that the village is kept safe. And it was just a really awesome scene. I think Aang is awesome. It's kind of nice. I feel like a lot of times these days, you'll have shows where the main character is bland, or you'll have books where the main character is bland. You can do sort of a reader insert or a viewer insert, and it's the side characters that they have more personality. It's almost like we don't want to take a chance giving personality to a main character, because what if viewers feel they can't relate to this main character? So we'll make them empty, and it's less of a chance by making side characters have personality. But I feel like what ends up happening is everybody loves the side characters, and the main characters, you could take them or leave them. And I really like that Aang is an awesome main character. There's a lot of depth to him. He's so sweet also, and he just makes you kind of joyful, but then when he does have those really awesome moments, you're like, yeah. So he's great. They're all great. All the characters in the show are fantastic. I know I mentioned previously, the only thing I knew about the show is pretty much because when we first started watching it, my husband's like, oh yeah, Uncle Iroh, because he's seen it. He was like, he's a fan favorite. So I know that Iroh is one that a lot of people like, but I'm like, I like all these characters. Iroh is funny, and he's a great comedic relief character, and he certainly has wisdom here and there that you see from him. He has a lot of patience with Zuko. He obviously cares very much about Zuko. But they're all great characters. This isn't me saying he isn't worthy of being a fan favorite. I'm just like, how do you decide? They're all so great. Anyway, so that was a really fun episode. And then now getting to episode 15, the last of the ones for today. There is a lot that I was waiting for when it came to hearing a bit about Katara and Sokka's family. So as soon as the episode started, I was like, are we going to see, finally, are they going to hear something about their dad? And that's kind of, you don't end up seeing their father, but you do see some water tribe people. And you get some more backstory of how hard it was for Sokka to watch all the men, including his father, leave and feel like he wasn't able to fulfill his role of being a protector, of being a fighter, and also just missing his father. And he also misses out on opportunities. You see that with the way he's supposed to dodge ice with the ship, this rite of passage that he's supposed to have, that's taken away because his entire way of life has been disrupted by the violence that's transpiring. So I like that we finally I wrote finally water tribe info. I was glad we finally got that. And this decision they have to make of, do we find our father or do we stay by Aang? And the show does rely a little bit on Aang not waiting to hear everything. And this isn't, I feel like most people's favorite trope is I overheard some stuff but not everything and I jumped to conclusions. However, it didn't last an enormous amount of time. It was a contained plot thing. It only was for this episode, and it was a short amount of time because he pretty quickly is like, I hid this message that talks about where your dad is, and I'm really sorry. He gets that over with pretty quickly. But when they were like, oh, we're going our separate ways, I was like, no, don't do it. I mean, I knew they weren't going to for real, but even just the idea of them separating paths was devastating. I was like, don't do it. Aang is all alone. He needs his friends. I don't know the tracker girl's name. She makes her first appearance in this episode. I'm assuming she'll come back. I hate this woman a lot. First off, because I didn't like that she was whipping her animal. Whatever that thing is, the animal that tracks everybody by scent. She whips it a bunch. I didn't like that. And then when she was attacking Appa, I was like, I hate this woman so much. And I was also really pumped for the monster fight, though, when it was Appa versus whatever that thing is called. I don't remember. I was like, yeah, go Appa. It was cool because we've seen Appa thus far mostly just be kind of lazy. Even how he flies is very silly and kind of lazy. And he's kind of here and there sweet with Aang. And then he also just, rolls around sometimes. But to see him angry and protective, I was like, Appa's the best. So I thought that was cool. And it was cool to see the monster fight and then an Aang-Zuko fight happening simultaneously. And then Sokka, I mentioned previously that it's cool to see, and when I say previously, I mean in a different video talking about previous episodes. But Sokka often, because he doesn't have any bending skills, he has to rely on cleverness to solve problems. And so when he figures out we can use the perfume to throw its scent detection off, I was like, nice job, Sokka. Uncle Iroh did have a really funny moment when the woman and Zuko were temporarily paralyzed, and he's laying on the ground, Iroh is, with holding the woman, and Zuko's like, Uncle, you weren't affected, and he's like, shh. I was like, that's pretty funny. Anyway, so that was amusing. But the whole fight was done really well. This definitely pulled at the heart a lot. We got some depth for the Water Tribe. So overall, this was, once again, maybe not the... Well, this one was great in that it did kind of have bigger plot stuff because you see Aang and Zuko going head to head. But then it had depth for side characters, and it also threw in some additional world-building elements. So this episode was great because it had a lot of pieces of a lot of different things with it. These were great episodes. Best batch of 5 that we've gotten around to so far. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 5 episodes. I'm ready for Zuko and Aang to team up. I don't know if it's going to happen yet. I feel like Zuko is maybe going to finally turn his back on the Fire Nation, though. I just don't know if that translates to him and Aang joining forces just yet. But I feel like that one episode of him rescuing Aang, I don't think it's the first time we're going to see them actually kind of working together. We'll see if I'm just completely wrong about that. But yeah, I would say that's my main prediction for these next 5 episodes. I imagine Aang will finally reach the North Pole, but I don't know. I feel like a lot of this season we've gotten a lot of Earth Tribe, and I'm surprised because I'm like, well, we know Aang can learn some elements in the meantime because he learned some water bending from Katara. And I don't remember what the next book is, because I know this is like water. So I would imagine he's going to reach the North Pole. We'll see, I guess. Maybe they'll meet up with their dad finally, and then that's how he'll learn. We'll see. I don't know. But that's it for these 5 episodes. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.